Now, I realize when we talk about economics, a lot of people's eyes just sort of glaze over and like, who cares? Economics are more important than anyone I think wants to admit because it is such an intricate and difficult problem and oftentimes such a boring conversation. But it's important, you see, because economic policy and specifically economic ideology oftentimes will determine the future of your country. It will determine the kind of decisions that your politicians will make. And in South Africa, we're poster children for what politicians with a communist socialist bend will do to an economy. Now, if you like this video, if you like the kind of content that I make, if I may just ask you to hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, and comment, because YouTube does reward engagement. And I would like more people to see this because I think videos like this are super important. People need to know what is happening in our world. We are fundamentally talking about tariffs. Yes, that's still the talk of the town. But as you can see by the tabs up there, I have quite a banger laid out for you today. So, South Africa is currently let's cross our fingers and hope that Trump will extend the deadline that is literally this Thursday, after which South Africa will face 30% tariffs on all goods that we export to the United States. We have already learned from the governor of the Reserve Bank, as well as very notable economists, that we are looking at between 100,000 and 300,000 jobs lost in the medium term, with no estimations on how many jobs will be lost in the long term. But most people agree it will probably be a bloodbath. So from the South African side, their arguments that they make is that, hey, we haven't had an opportunity to really talk yet. Like, the US have just rejected most of our deals that we've laid in front of them. So because they don't want to talk to us, they need to give us an extension. Of course, what they don't mention is that the US has given South Africa 3 months. And in the 3 months that South Africa has had, the South African government has not yet sent a new ambassador to the United States, despite calls from Washington, D.C. for the South African government to send a new ambassador. Not only that, but our special envoy, Mr. Jonas, that was supposed to go to the US as the trade guy, isn't there because he's not allowed to go to the United States as a diplomat. So the South African government is the one that has not taken this seriously. And now the South African government is saying, hey, you guys haven't talked to us yet. You should give us another chance. Let us really prove to you that we are interested in this. Now, last week, we found out that there's a pre-deal deal. The pre-deal deal means nothing, despite what the politicians will have you believe, despite what I originally sort of reported on. I made a mistake. I made a video saying that I made a mistake and updated you and explained how this works. The pre-deal agreement literally is just a piece of paper that says that the United States is still open to negotiations. It doesn't mean anything else. Like, literally everything we've been doing up until now, the United States basically just said, yeah, we'll do more of it. And one of the main reasons for it is, while South Africa continues to make massive concessions, like basically dropping all tariffs and saying to the US, we'll import all of your gas, we'll import all of your gas and fracking technologies, we'll import some of your oil most likely, we'll give you full access to your pork and your chicken, you can sell all of it here, your beef, bring it in, right? We don't care, we'll buy everything you want. None of that makes a dent because this is the 4 demands that the US has before they will even begin to entertain a non-tariff agreement or very much lower tariffs. Now, it's important to note just very quickly here, South Africa will never get a zero tariff deal. In fact, I don't think there's a country in the world that has gotten a zero tariff deal from the United States. And that's because the United States isn't interested in zero tariff deals. The United States understands that most countries in the world, even at a 10% or a 15% tariff, will still get massive benefit from selling into the United States. And the United States government gets a good little kickback that they've already said they're going to do a rebate for the people of America because of all the money that they're getting from these tariff deals, right? So fundamentally, for South Africa, 10% would be amazing. If we could get 10% tariffs because of the weakness of the rand, we'd still sell our goods at 10% tariffs at lower than what Americans could sell it for. So 10% would literally not affect us, and we could probably get access to a lot more from the United States. Now, one of the things that the South African government proves, I guess, how serious they are about this is when you look at this last 1 year, the exemption of US entities from all Black economic empowerment requirements. That's not just BEE, it also applies to any and all restrictions placed locally on American entities. Kind of like this one, where the DA, the minister, is, by the way, a DA minister that has just announced the new bill that will basically force places like Netflix, places like Prime to show more local content. This would literally run straight in the face of this, which the Americans don't want. The question then becomes, but why? Why is the South African government so hell bent on not acquiescing to any of the requests of the American government? Before people go, oh, the Americans are just a bunch of bullies, the Americans aren't, right? If you look at the countries that have already signed trade deals with America, they got a lot of perks from signing those trade deals. Japan, one of those countries, England, one of those countries, they get perks from the Americans, but also the Americans get perks from them. This is the nature of trade deals. It's a sort of go and, yeah, oh, well, we're willing to give you this, but then we also want this. Okay, well, we're willing to give you this, but then we also want this. So everyone agrees on what they like, and then, the trade deal goes ahead, and everyone should be happy. So why? Why is the ANC refusing to make this deal? In my estimation, it comes from a fundamental war that is taking place in our world that none of us even know about. And this is the war between the collectivists, the communists, and the free market capitalists. And I think we are a country caught in the middle of this war. To highlight this to you, we have to go to the World Economic Forum. So China and the model that China runs is the model that the World Economic Forum believes is the model of the future. And you can literally go to their website to find these articles. They don't hide this. Klaus Schwab, he wrote a book called The Great Reset, where he lays all of his plans out in detail for what a new economy needs to look like. And very specifically, it's what is referred to as stakeholder capitalism. Stakeholder capitalism is a misnomer. That's not capitalism. What it effectively is the Chinese model. The idea that all of society's needs are provided for by a few very rich and very powerful corporations, and these corporations are then in turn managed by the government, and so everyone is taken care of. One of the fundamental reasons for this is the identification of the downfall of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union largely came undone when finally Russia had to contend with the fact that government cannot run an economy. The economy is just too vast, too chaotic, and too difficult to run from committee. But corporations are great at this, and this is where the Chinese identified, if we marry the two, so we have the corporations, but the corporations answer to the government, effectively, they are owned by the government, then we get the benefits of capitalism, but we also get the benefits of communism. Of course, you don't really get the benefits of either. You just get you get a country that is enslaved by the government. To make this to make this clear to you so that you can understand, we have to go to the 18th Brumaire from Louis Bonaparte. This was written by Karl Marx in 1852. And really, when you scroll down to where Karl Marx speaks about the peasants of France, Karl Marx laments that peasants, or farmers in this case, aren't a collective group. They don't work together. They tend to be on their own. They tend to be more conservative. They tend to want the government to leave them alone. And as such, they are a blight to the class struggle. So he ends it by saying, they are therefore incapable of asserting their class interest in their own name, whether through a parliament or a convention. They cannot represent themselves. They must be represented. Their representative must at the same time appear as their master, as an authority over them, an unlimited governmental power which protects them from the other classes and sends them rain and sunshine from above. The political influence of the smallholding peasant, therefore, finds its final expression in the executive power which subordinates society itself. And he fundamentally goes on in this article to basically compare them to a sack of potatoes. He says that they are like a bunch of potatoes in a sack called a sack of potatoes. They're useless. You have to force them to just bend the knee. This is where the Great Reset comes from. This is where stakeholder capitalism comes from. The idea that you need overlords that basically force the parts of society that can't be fit into a class to basically become a class as a result of this overlord that just runs the show. This is why you have far more factory farms now. As technology have improved, the communists have simply changed gears. On the other side of this, remember I told you that there is a struggle going on in our world. On the other side of this, you have people like Scott Bessent. He is the Treasury Secretary of the United States of America, as well as Kevin Hassett, who is he has his PhD in economic studies, and he now works in the Trump administration. These two men, but not only these two men, there's actually quite a few men who has had a profound impact on Trump's policy. They've identified a completely different approach, and I would argue, without going too deep into the weeds here, because economic theory is a very, very intricate sort of idea, but you effectively just need to know two things. Capitalism isn't just one thing. People like to say, oh, we live in capitalistic times. Well, which version of capitalism? The modern version of capitalism that we live under is a capitalism called margins capitalism, or at least loosely defined as marginal capitalism. The idea here is that value is determined at the margins. In other words, the value of a good is pretty much what people are willing to pay for it. Nothing else matters. So, for example, yes, it might be far more labor intensive and far more time consuming to build a home than what it is necessarily to build an iPhone. But for some people, an iPhone is far more valuable than a home. And so they'll rather buy the newest iPhone than what they will buy a home, right? This is sort of the idea. Of course, that's bonkers, but you get the point. Now, this is the marginal capitalist guys. Then you have the father of, I would say, capitalism, but most importantly, the father of classical economics, Adam Smith, and his version of capitalism was very different. You see, he argued that value comes from labor and the resources that make the product. So, however long it took to make a product, however many resources went into making that product, would determine the value of that product. And so it was trying to define a more exclusive sort of hardline approach to what is value. And in this, we'll have to get into so many conversations if we're actually going to deep dive into this that I won't bore you with it. But effectively, the marginalist capitalist guys are the ones that oversee just these bloated prices that continuously go, because they also tend to be very much of the belief that if you just let people go and you just let people make money, then everyone will just make a lot of money. The issue is that every single economic study that we've ever done on this shows that when you run the models, the AI models for this, it always ends with a few people hoarding all of the wealth and the rest of the people basically being under the stakeholders of capitalism, right? That's literally what it shows. If you just run it, the stakeholders will always be the ones that hold all of the wealth. And so classical economics comes and says, no, no, no. You do need to allow people some freedom. But you can think of it almost as like a football game, right? Or like a rugby game. You have the field and you have lines, you have rules, right, on the field. As far as what the players do, they're free to do whatever they want. They can kick the ball, they can pass the ball, they can run at the other player. The other player can tackle them, he can trip them up, whatever he wants to do. But as long as it's within the rules. So the idea is that government's job is to define the rules of the playing field and then allow people to play as much as they want. These are the fundamental differences. Now, I would argue that people like Scott Bessent and people like Kevin Hassett, they're closer to what we would refer to as classical economists. And this is the view that Trump and Scott Bessent has, is this idea of a great reset also throughout the world, but in terms of capitalism. So the idea that people should once again matter. Scott Bessent has this great line that he said to Tucker Carlson, where he said, the power has been in Wall Street for far too long. It's time that the power returned to Main Street. So everything that they're doing, they're trying to get ordinary people, small business owners, small workers to make more money so that they can actually partake in the economy rather than these conglomerates. Of course, for the ANC, they're part of the Chinese model. The Chinese model is part of the World Economic Forum's model. And that's the idea that no, screw the small business owner, screw the individual worker. What we want are these very large corporations. And that's why when you see articles like 100 people have made trillions of rands out of BE, this doesn't faze the ANC. It tells them that their policies are working. They're creating the stakeholders of the future. The problem, of course, in South Africa is that most of the stakeholders are idiots, but that doesn't even matter. This is why the ANC and the DA don't care about Trump's policies. They don't care about Trump's trade deals because they genuinely believe that there's future, the future that they're working towards, this communist utopia. And that, by the way, is the biggest problem. That's the one that they're working towards. So America and Trump, they think that they can wait out Trump, right? Trump is going to be in office maybe for the next 3 years. And once Trump is out, a new Democrat will take over. The Democrats are far more aligned with the World Economic Forum and the Great Reset. And so they'll get right back to just buying and selling with America. So sure, we'll have a little bit of downtime, but we can probably shift away the trade. We'll have to have a talk at some point about what the trade actually, how you shift trade, because that's not necessarily that easy. But fundamentally, you have to understand this. This is why there's no deal, and this is why the ANC has no interest in making a deal, because everything is working exactly as planned. And if they were now to start to acquiesce to Trump's requests, this would put a huge dent in the plan, the economic future that they envision throughout the world. And I would argue, just as a last sort of fundamental point, one of the biggest mistakes that human beings can make is the idea that we can invent utopia on Earth. I think this is bad, this is stupid, and this is the fundamental problem. Because the amount of people you have to kill in pursuit of this utopia and they never actually reach it is unfathomable to the human mind. Because humans are flawed. Human societies are flawed. It is not true that most humans are fundamentally good. It is not true that most humans fundamentally just want to be left alone. We see the results of this throughout war-torn areas where most people aren't fundamentally good, and they'll sell out their parents if it means looking out for themselves. So yeah, I just think that's the big problem. Anyone who dreams of utopia already has dreams that involve millions and millions of people dead. Anyways, let me know in the comment section down below how you feel about all of this, because it truly does help. If you've watched until now, please consider hitting the like button, subscribing to the channel, and then a huge shout out to all of the patrons as well as the YouTube channel members. If you want to become a member, hit the join button. Patrons, link is in the description down below, where you get to watch all videos ad-free. As always, thank you so much for all of your support. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll see all of you in the next one. Peace.